tools we have today, the good news is that the tools we have today are actually
The story we keep hearing over and over and over again is that folks are being interdicted, if you will, by the IT department, when they bring their own devices into the office, into the plant, or whatever it might be. I mean, there's a story about a guy buys himself a tablet. I don't know what kind he bought, but he loads the thing up with all kinds of apps because he figures, hey, I'm going to go in, I'm going to be productive with this thing, and when he gets in there, he's using it for about an hour or so. When somebody from IT comes down and says, look, no, we're not allowing this. We've got concerns. We've got security concerns or whatever it is. And we're hearing these stories more and more. And I mean, I'm just wondering, how widespread is this problem, if it is a problem, with people bringing their own devices into the office?
Well, Russell, I believe that the BYODs are here to stay. So rather than fight it, we have to embrace BYODs. And one thing I would recommend companies do is basically establish a baseline for security and for privacy policies to start with, right? So when we talk about a baseline, we are looking at an IT department trying to determine what requirements do I need to enforce on these BYODs to be brought into the company. It could be something as simple as, I'm only going to allow you to check your email, or I'm going to allow you to download documents. Once that's established by the IT department, I think we can then start analyzing, well, what BYODs am I going to allow you to bring in? Am I going to allow you to bring in an Android, an iPhone, an iPad? It's important to establish the privacy policies as well, because unfortunately, if you ever have to terminate an employee, you want to be able to delete that information that was downloaded. You want to be able to, at some point, remove all applications that were installed. So I believe that establishing a baseline and a guideline for privacy as well is a good start when it comes to accepting BYODs. The one thing I would like to see, though, Matt, is that in my case, cost keeps going up. I have an iPhone. I carry, wireless adapter. I got a hotspot in my bag, and I'm paying like 3-4 times. I got another charge at home that I'm paying for as well. Can you guys help us out here?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great point. In fact, we are. I mean, and not just from a Verizon perspective. I think from an industry perspective, you're seeing this idea of really providing you a bucket of data, if you will, to be managed on the endpoints the devices that you want. And we just launched that in the consumer space. You're seeing that now move in the business space. So you'll pay a recurring charge, and from that you'll get access to whatever devices, up to a certain amount, but you'll be able to share those devices, share anywhere, share type of thing. And I think that's a really good point, because that's managing that cost profile as well, because more devices show up. It's not just a security issue, that's number one, but it's also a cost issue as well. Another role I feel I'm almost personally responsible from an operator or carrier is, I think that the enforcement of security, and then part of that enforcement is the delivery of applications, because apps worry me the most. Using things like private app stores that we would manage in a cloud, or some level enforcing those really important IT restrictions you talked about, helping with that enforcement via the carrier, which is kind of a unique role for us, not just to transport, but also almost an arbitrator of the IT asset, and then delivery of those security profiles and permissions down to the device itself.
What we hear typically is, time and time again, I'll meet with a CIO or CTO, and I bought an iPad. I bought an iPad for my wife, and now I'm going to tell the IT department, folks, you've got to figure out how to use an iPad. Now, at some point, it comes back down to the cost. Why is a company using? Now, we deal more with the corporate liable devices, so these are devices that are typically bought by the corporation. It's not typically a BYOD model. But at some point, IT has to take it, and they have to justify it, and they do a TCO analysis, a total cost of ownership analysis, and the numbers that we've been working with some of the analysts is that about 20% of the cost of the device is actually the acquisition cost. So there's a big cost center in the back end to support the devices, to manage the devices, to have maintenance supports, security profiles, and the like.
Good point.
And
Really
you
good
know,
point.
this is it's formidable when you're dealing with a consumer device that wasn't really designed and doesn't really focus on that particular segment.
You know, I would have thought that the main concern, or the sole concern really, was security. Obviously that is an issue, but now I'm hearing that there are other things involved. And Martin says that, okay, maybe you want to bring in an Android device, or maybe somebody else wants to bring in another device. And so that leads me to wonder, what are the challenges if you've got people bringing in multiple devices, multiple operating systems, etc.? Is that a major thing for the IT department to have to deal with? What's the cost there? What are the challenges? I mean, I just don't know.
There's a cost involved, and it can be pretty high if it's not handled the right way. So at one point, Bruce, I heard you say, oh, you're gonna, your wife, iPad, you're going to buy an iPad. Throw it at the IT department, it's their problem.
Worry about it.
Right. You know, we find that happening a lot. And the one thing that we try to do is, within the IT department, again, we are saying, look, we are not going to train you on how to turn your iPad on how to do every single thing with your iPad. We are focused on the business requirements of that iPad. What do you need to learn? What do we need to train you on in order to do the day-to-day business duties and features and actions at the workplace? We are not going to be training our employees on things that are non-business, non-business tasks that they should be performing on a daily basis. Another thing that we have done to help with this is device management. That's a big part of what a lot of people are focused on today, a lot of companies, especially with large rollouts. So in order to support the IT department and help reduce cost, IT departments are turned into device management tools. And the one thing we are seeing is that not only are we using the device management tools, traditionally they have been used for workstations and rugged devices, but now we are seeing IT departments, they're pushing device management tools down to these BYODs as well. And what that does, it helps with the management of these devices, it helps basically secure the devices. We can remove data from the devices if needed. We can lock down the devices. When they're on the VPN, we can restrict access to certain things. So that's the one area where the IT department can actually help reduce cost. One other area that I believe they can help in is when it comes to training, there's interactive videos that also they can now utilize a lot more efficiently than they did 5 years ago. We always had interactive videos, but now we can push those videos down directly to the devices. We can put them up on certain media repositories, to allow the users to go and help be trained by looking at these interactive videos.
So corporations need device management from the handheld rugged device that might be in a warehouse to all the way out to a field staff, field personnel. It sounds like what you're seeing, what we're seeing, probably what Matt, what you're seeing too, is that it needs to be comprehensive. The MDM, the mobile device management, needs to span from all the way from that warehouse all the way out to that field employee. You can't separate it from the security. We hear application lockdown. Most of our customers in the retail environment will whitelist the device, so only select applications will run. And I assume from a carrier perspective, that may ultimately move into the cloud?
It starts with MDM, absolutely. I completely agree with you. And I agree that it's, any device that's going to touch corporate data needs to be managed. From I think that's a good IT policy. But what about the IT teams? I mean, we are putting so much pressure on them. Consumerization's driving devices to that. I know that there's a lot of work on the Motorola end to ensure that if it is going to be Android, that there's a hardening of the Android perspective.
So we get hit with the regulatory all the time. If it's retail, we get hit with PCI DSS. If it's healthcare, we get hit with HIPAA. If it's critical infrastructure, NERC, SIP, and actually, most people don't know that
PCI compliance for the retail
PCI,
side,
that's the DSS part. And but the states are actually trying to enact legislation. There's 46 states that have efforts to enact legislation for even private information. So it's no longer just social security records or healthcare records, just lists that might have private information where they will require that if you lose a device that's not protected, that doesn't have encryption or necessary protection mechanism, you have to report that. and that gets posted on a public website. So now all of a sudden there's a brand problem with have personal information that's been exposed. It has to be, you were talking end to end, we were talking earlier, yeah, it's got to truly be an end to end, which is this basic security paradigm. It's only as strong as the weakest link.
I'm curious about the legal aspect of that, because you have company information that's contained on a personal device, and now it's been lost, and company secrets have been compromised, etc. And who owns that information, and who's responsible? I mean, I'm sure there's a whole world of litigation, you know, right there that undoubtedly some companies are experiencing.
The dual persona. I think actually all three of us were at one point, we were talking dual persona.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, you know, and I think back to the point about that IT department, I feel especially, you know, interested in helping that organization, because this isn't going away. The rapid adoption of technology, what we were talking about, the life cycles now are 3 or 4 months. Yep. So we're going to need to provide that from, and they are legally responsible, even if their assets end up with any type of information, personal or business. It really becomes an issue, and again, it gets back to the mobile device management piece. But,
yeah, that's the, you know, we've asked constantly by customers, selective wipe. You know, we want to make sure that we wipe your business part of the phone, we're not going to wipe your personal. So that dual persona, and whether it's a BYOD and it's mostly your personal device, but then once in a while a business device, or whether it's a corporate liable device and it's primarily your business tool and slight personal, it still has that dual persona that needs to be managed.
You know, I'm curious about this device management thing, because if I put on my chief financial officer hat for just a moment here, now I've got to stroke a check for all of these devices if we're going to have allow these things into the enterprise and if we're going to own them. But I've also presumably got to invest in a mobile device management solution or something, right? I don't know how much that's going to cost me. But here's a question. What are the criteria that I need to be on top of or to evaluate if I'm looking for some kind of asset management solution here? What do I need to be considering?
Are you looking to manage the devices, or are you looking to?
Yeah, I'm looking to manage those devices. I mean, I'm hearing, you know, that's something that's critical. If we're going to allow, as a part of my BYOD strategy, I've got to manage these devices and all that entails.
So the device management tool will get you to that place as far as managing the devices. Even inventory, keeping inventory of the devices. You'll be able to identify down to a very low level what's out there in the field. That's one way of doing it, and that's the recommended way, right? You want to manage the devices. You want to know when they're being used, when they're not being used. You know, if they're being used in a certain area, maybe, you know, you want to block access when that employee is in a certain area of the country, area of the building, depending on the company that's enforcing this. Another area where I thought you were going to touch on when it comes to expense for these CFOs is the software side of things, right? Because one thing we have seen is that traditionally, you know, the software was built to last on, at least on enterprise level rugged devices, 4 years, 5 years. Now we are seeing where employees are bringing in BYODs, and guess what? The version they brought in, the model they brought in, is no longer supported 6 months later. Yet the software that we push onto those devices must run on the next version. On the next version 6 months later, 6 months later after that. So we are seeing that companies are now having to make a decision on how they handle maintaining software for the future of smartphones, etc. And one thing that we are recommending companies do, a couple of things actually. Number one, a lot of companies put aside money for maintenance and support of software. M&S is what we call it. We are recommending that companies not only do that, but they set aside money for research and development as well, R&D, so that they have a comfort level that their software, their applications will run on future versions of these smartphones that are coming. And one way to do that is to focus on solutions that will run on multiple devices. So you want to invest in software going forward that's going to run on multiple platforms. And
thinning out the software to a point where it's almost virtualization. So you're not as bound by the hardware, but it's really delivered on the device that the IT department's going to let in, if it's they bring it or if it's given to them as an asset. I think that's true.
Right.
It's a good point. And we're starting to see virtualization really become reality, not just from a dual persona, but from another extension of the Citrix-like application, or thinning, as we talked about, thinning out the app so it just runs, in a sense, in the browser experience. And that way you're not as concerned about something that lives, an instance of something on the device itself.
Yeah, we have some limits in our context on the virtualization side because we have a lot of folks that want to use the scanner, a lot of barcode collection.
It's a purposefully built environment.
Exactly. For a pure server screenscape, it's great, but when you start getting data collection, it gets a little bit mired for us. And I think we're saying is, first and foremost, do you support the portfolio of devices that you have in the field? So that could be CE, that could be Windows Mobile, Android, iOS, and so many. And then the question is, how do you deal with the fragmentation? Just like Android today is trying to deal with fragmentation in an open source environment, you now as an enterprise, because you've got so many different devices on so many different revisions of operating systems with so many different applications you've brought into the ecosystem, how do you administer that and manage that? And formidable challenge.
When you talk about bringing all of this multiplicity of things into the ecosystem, are there certain devices that you should simply not allow in? And are there certain employees who should not be allowed to BYOD? I don't know.
I think there's always going to be limitations. I think based on the baseline you have established as an organization, I think there are going to be devices that you're going to say, they shouldn't be on my network. Security-wise, they don't have the features built in to support the security policies I want to push down to these devices. I think that's always going to be a challenge in determining, do I allow every device on the network or don't I? And I think that the easy answer, you really don't, right? It depends on your baseline, it depends on your privacy policies. You guys can probably talk more about
IT policies will define the device. I don't know. It's really up to the organization. I do think there's absolutely a device that isn't allowed, shouldn't be allowed. But just the fact that we're talking about, is there a device that we wouldn't allow, tells you how far we've come in a year.
Yeah, this was good point. Pre-2009, we kind of break things into eras. Pretty much everything was a Windows Mobile or a BlackBerry device, which had a fairly comprehensive, robust set of enterprise capabilities and met pretty much the security profile of an IT administrator. We've gone into this phase now where anything and everything is open. I was actually meeting with the CIO of one of the major parcel delivery companies, and he said, never in my career have I had employees asking me to use their devices that they bought with their money for work purposes. So I don't think it is a gray area where you can't isolate the entire BYOD, the consumer part of the market, but once again, you need to Martin's point, is have a minimum baseline set of, you must meet the following security criteria.
And I think from a perspective of corporate versus individual, I think from a corporate perspective, if it's a purposefully built solution, it has a scanning environment, we can fairly lock that down. We can say in this environment, these are the standards we're going to keep. And then the individual liables, that's where we need to have all the device management, maybe allow some element of corporate data from a browsing or from an email perspective, but that has to be managed. I think we have a lot more control on a corporately owned asset versus an individually owned asset, individual liable asset.
Yeah, the concern there is that security boundary between when you have your contacts database for work, but now you've loaded up a piece of Android malware, and of course it just looks across the boundary and says, oh great, I'll send a contacts to anybody.
It's happening today. I mean, that is absolutely happening. So.
When you mentioned talking to a chief technology officer somewhere who says, never have I had so many people in the company come to me and say, I want to use, it leads me to wonder if we are talking about not a coming phenomenon, but something that is already arrived. And those of us who don't have BYOD strategies, we are running to catch up to a reality that is already there and undoubtedly has caused problems for some of us.
definitely behind the curve if you're not thinking, if you have not implemented, if you have not put some BYOD policy in place at this point in time. You're behind the curve.
You're catching up.
You're catching up, right?
It's interesting, we see in many instances companies that now have a mobile security officer. We never had that title before, and generally when I'll go into those customers, it's like, oh, well, they just started a month ago or 2 months ago or 3 months ago. That was never a position.
I just read that in London they lose 60,000 handheld devices in they've lost 60,000 in 6 months in cabs. I mean, they'll leave behind, that's a, you know, there needs to be some level of saying, let's turn those things off quickly.
Yeah. And that's where we are. I mean, the tools we have today, the good news is that the tools we have today actually allow us to do that, right? I mean, the tools we have today, because of the data plans that we have now, because every device is always connected, we can actually reach out and, you know, basically shut down the
And
device.
self-service, so we can give that control right to the enterprise.
So that's encouraging.
Yes.
Right, that's encouraging.
This is information. I wish I could see that guy, you know, who had his issue with his iPad when he goes in there and IT tells him, no, you can't do it. I wish I could tell him some of the things we've heard today.